My name is Harper Quinn, and I will never forget the sound of that knock. 3 slow thuds against my front door, the kind that carried both fear and apology. When I opened it, my reflection stood there trembling. It was Grace, my twin sister. Her face was swollen, one eye purple, her lips split open. She didn't have to say a word. I already knew. I had trained enough women to recognize the look of someone who's been hurt too many times, the flinch, the shame, the way her hands shook even when she was safe. I pulled her inside. She smelled like metal and rain. "He did this again?" I asked quietly. She nodded, tears spilling fast. "He said if I leave, he'll tell everyone I'm crazy. He said I'll lose my job." Ethan. The charming husband everyone adored. The man who donated to charity, smiled at neighbors, and broke my sister behind closed doors. I cleaned her wounds, gave her tea, and tucked her into my guest bed. But when I stood in front of the mirror afterward, looking at our identical faces, something inside me shifted. I'd spent years teaching other women how to fight back physically, emotionally, legally, yet I'd watched my own sister crumble under fear. Maybe she couldn't face him, but I could. I traced the bruise on my knuckle from sparring earlier that week and whispered to my reflection, "You picked the wrong twin, Ethan," because that night something in me made a promise not just to protect her but to end his illusion of power forever. The next morning, Grace barely touched her breakfast. Her hands kept brushing the mug's handle, never lifting it. "He'll find me," she whispered. "He always does." "He won't," I said. "Not this time." I told her my plan, simple but dangerous. I'd go to her house pretending to be her stay just long enough to get proof of what he'd done. She froze, eyes wide. "Harper, no. He's unpredictable." I gave a small, steady smile. "Then he won't expect me." Before I left, I called Officer Lena Rhodes, the sheriff of Willow Creek, and one of my former self-defense students. I told her what Grace had suffered and what I intended to do. "If you're going in, Rhodes said you do it my way. You wear a wire. You call me every night, and if he lays a hand on you, we move in." "Deal," I said. Grace's house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac lined with trimmed hedges and polite mailboxes. The kind of neighborhood where no one believes in monsters because they mow their lawns on Sundays. I parked her car in the driveway and inhaled once before unlocking the door. Inside, everything smelled too clean citrus and bleach, like someone trying to scrub away their sins. I changed into one of Grace's soft sweaters, adjusted my hair, and waited. When the front door opened, Ethan stood there with a grin too bright to be human. "There's my girl," he said. "I was worried you'd done something stupid." I kept my eyes down, my voice small, just needed air. He stepped closer, his hand cupping my cheek with deceptive gentleness. "You know I only get mad because I love you, right?" Every instinct screamed to break his wrist. Instead, I blinked up at him, forcing my breathing to match Grace's tremble. "I know," I whispered. That night, when he finally fell asleep, I sat in the dark corner of the bedroom and pressed my fingers against the tiny mic clipped inside my sweater. "Everything's recording," I murmured. "Let's begin." By the second day, the performance had begun to crack. Not mine, his. Ethan's charm never lasted long without an audience. The first Fisher appeared over breakfast. He poured coffee for himself, none for me. "You've been quiet lately," he said, watching me over the rim of his mug. "Not like you." I forced a weak smile. "Just tired." His eyes narrowed, calculating. "You know, sometimes I think you do this on purpose, make me feel like the bad guy." I met his gaze for half a second too long, and his jaw flexed. He didn't like that. He liked Grace, meek, malleable, apologetic. I remembered Rhodes's advice, stay calm, stay small, but my silence made him restless. He leaned back, smirking. "You think I don't see it, the way you make people pity you. You like being the victim." That word, victim, landed like a challenge. I wanted to say, "Not this time," but I swallowed it. Instead, I looked down and murmured, "You're right, I'm sorry." Later that afternoon, I planted a hidden camera behind the bookshelf. My hands didn't shake, but my heartbeat echoed in my ears. When Ethan came home, he was in one of his moods, the kind that made the air dense. "Where were you?" "At the store," I said simply. He stepped closer. "Don't lie to me." The scent of his cologne made my skin crawl. "I'm not." He slammed his palm against the wall beside my head, not touching me, but close enough to make a point. You think you can talk to me like that now? I froze just long enough for the camera to capture his shadow against my face, then whispered, I'm sorry. He backed away, smiling, satisfied with my submission. But as soon as he left the room, I pressed the recorder hidden in my sleeve. His threats, his tone, his words, all of it now belonged to me. That night, as I replayed the recording through earbuds, I didn't feel fear, only clarity. The mask was slipping, and when it finally fell, I'd make sure everyone saw what was underneath. By the third day, Ethan's paranoia had turned into obsession. He started checking my phone, scanning through texts that weren't really mine. I'd anticipated that I'd already filled Grace's message history with entries to bait him texts about meeting a counselor, hints about keeping evidence, and one carefully worded note that said, I can't live like this anymore. When he read that, his hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles went white. So you think you can destroy me? He hissed, tossing the phone onto the table. I looked up, feigning confusion. Ethan, Don't lie. His voice cracked like a whip. You think people would believe you? You'd look insane. He was spiraling exactly where I needed him. That night, I called Officer Rhodes, using a code phrase we'd agreed on. The lights flicker when it rains. She knew that meant I had what we needed and that it was time to close in. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted him to confess, not out of rage but out of fear. I set my phone on the counter with the camera running and asked softly, Ethan, why do you get so angry with me? He stared at me, chest heaving. Because you make me crazy, Grace. You push me until I snap, then you cry like a child. You think that's fair? His voice was trembling now, the performance cracking open. I pressed, gently. So, all those bruises were my fault. He froze. The silence stretched thick and dangerous. Then his mouth curled into a smirk. Don't act like you didn't deserve some of them. Click. The camera caught every word. He noticed the red recording light half a second too late. What is that? He roared, lunging for it. But this time I didn't back away. I met him halfway, grabbing his wrist, twisting just enough for him to gasp in pain. I'm not Grace, I said quietly, my voice steady as steel. For a split second he looked lost, confused, almost afraid. Then blue and red lights flooded through the windows, washing the room in the color of consequence. The front door burst open with a crash that shook the picture frames off the wall. Officer Rhodes entered first, her voice sharp and commanding. Ethan Marsh stepped away from her. He froze, the rage on his face melting into disbelief. What the hell is this? Step. Back. She repeated, her hand hovering near her holster. Two other officers moved in behind her, their flashlights cutting through the dark corners of the living room. Ethan turned to me, eyes blazing. You called them after everything I've done for you. I straightened, the disguise useless now. My voice was cold, steady. I didn't call them Ethan. She did. I reached up and pulled the small wire microphone from beneath my sweater. His eyes widened as he realized. Wait, what? Rhodes lifted the recorder from my hand, her expression unreadable. We have everything we need, she said. Every word you said tonight, every threat, every admission. Ethan's face turned red. You think this proves anything? She's lying? She's not even my wife. I met his gaze, my tone razor thin. You're right. I'm not Grace. For a hot beat, he looked completely unmoored. What? I'm her sister. I stepped closer until we were face to face. You hit the wrong woman this time. He lunged forward, but the officers were faster. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed like punctuation on every cruel word he'd ever said. Rhodes leaned in as they dragged him toward the door. You're done, Marsh. He twisted to look back at me, eyes full of fury. You think she's safe now? She'll always need me. I didn't flinch. No, I said quietly. She'll finally learn to need herself. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving the house in heavy silence. I stood in the center of the wreckage, the shattered glass, the overturned chair, the proof of a nightmare finally ending. Then I took a deep breath, the first one in what felt like years. 2 weeks later, the house on Willow Creek felt different, lighter somehow, like it could finally breathe. Grace came back quietly, her hair tucked under a baseball cap, eyes still wary, but no longer empty. I met her at the door with a soft smile. He's gone, I said. For real this time. She stepped inside, glancing around as if expecting his shadow to crawl out of the walls. It doesn't feel real, she murmured. It will, I promised. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd pretended to be her, where he'd lost control. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence you earn. Grace's fingers traced the rim of her mug. "You could have been hurt, Harper." I shrugged lightly. "I've been hurt before. This time I was prepared." She looked up, tears brimming. "I don't know how to thank you." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Don't thank me. Just never let anyone make you small again." Later, as we boxed up her things, she found the old photo of us as kids, both grinning, gap-toothed, covered in mud. "We were fearless," she said softly. "You still are," I replied. "You just forgot for a while." When she smiled, it wasn't perfect or bright, but it was real. For the first time in years, she looked like herself. Outside, Officer Rhodes pulled up in her cruiser to deliver the final report. Ethan was charged with assault, coercive control, and destruction of property. "He won't see daylight for a while," she said, folding her arms. Grace's shoulders sagged in relief. "Thank you." Rhodes smiled faintly. "Don't thank me. Thank your sister. She played this smarter than most detectives I know." As the cruiser drove off, Grace turned to me. "What now?" I took a deep breath, looking toward the open road beyond the cul-de-sac. "Now," I said, "we live without fear. That's the real revenge." The days that followed were quiet, almost unnervingly so. Grace slept through the nights without jolting awake for the first time in years. Sometimes she'd sit on the porch in the morning light, a mug of coffee cradled in her hands, and just breathe. No checking the window, no flinching at every car that passed, just peace, awkward and new. I went back to teaching self-defense at the community center downtown. The mats smelled like sweat and disinfectant, the air humming with that same fierce energy I loved. When the new women came in, eyes tired, shoulders hunched, I recognized the same fear that used to live in Grace. I started class the way I always did. Strength isn't about hitting back. It's about never letting someone convince you that you can't. One afternoon as class ended, a woman lingered by the door. "You really believe that?" she asked softly. I smiled. "I do now." That night I came home to find Grace at the dining table sketching on a pad of paper. She looked up and grinned a real grin this time. "I'm designing a new music program at school," she said, "for girls who've been through rough things. Maybe they'll find their voices again." My throat tightened. "They will," I said, "because you already did." Before bed, I looked around the living room, the same space where I'd once worn a wire waiting for a monster to show his true face. Now it was filled with soft laughter, open windows, sunlight spilling across the floor. Revenge had brought justice, but it wasn't what healed us. Healing came from choosing to live loudly, freely, unapologetically. As I turned off the lights, Grace whispered from the couch, "Harper." "Yeah, thank you for believing I was worth saving." I paused in the doorway, smiling in the dark. "You always were." A few months later, Grace and I drove back to Willow Creek for the first time since everything happened. The air smelled like pine and rain, the same way it did that night she knocked on my door, except now it didn't feel like fear. It felt like closure. We stopped by the courthouse where Ethan's sentencing had taken place. Grace watched the steps in silence, then whispered, "I thought revenge would feel darker than this." I smiled faintly. "That's because what we did wasn't revenge, it was justice." She turned to me, a soft strength in her eyes I'd never seen before. Maybe both. We visited Grandma Quinn's garden, overgrown but still blooming wild. Grace placed a single white lily by the fence. "I used to pray someone would save me," she said quietly. "Turns out it was always us." The sun dipped low, painting everything gold, the kind of light that makes the world look forgiving. I thought about that night, the bruises, the lies, the fear, and how we'd turned them into something unbreakable. People talk about revenge like it's fire, something that burns everything. It touches. But sometimes revenge is just light. The truth exposed, the mask torn away. The silence finally shattered. As we drove home, Grace hummed softly, a tune I didn't recognize, gentle and full of hope. I joined in, off-key but happy. For the first time in our lives, we weren't surviving someone else's story. We were writing our own.